Hello everyone. For today's lesson, what we're going to be doing is we are going to finish the topic about where is water found on Earth. So we've already talked about rivers, we've already talked about oceans, we've talked about lakes, we've talked about glaciers. So what I need you to do is to have your notes with you as well as the find water activity because there are some things that I will need you to annotate. So where we left off in the last lesson, we actually covered all these areas already, but we haven't explored about this part over here. Water is stored underground as groundwater. So we're going to find out how does water actually get underground in the first place, as well as what are the different terms that geographers actually use to talk about water that is stored underground. All right. So all of you should have made this annotation already. Water is stored underground as groundwater. For those of you who have already done it, excellent job. For those of you who have not, please make sure that you do this annotation right here. So circle the ground, and then water is stored underground as groundwater. All right. So what I want you to take note is that if you see this ear icon on my video, it means you do not have this slide. I am just using this slide. It is on my copy for me to actually demonstrate to you in a much clearer way, in a much more visual way, so that you can imagine how the process is like. So how does water actually get underground in the first place? I want you to imagine this. Let's say it rains, or let's say someone is watering their plants. What happens is that water will flow onto the ground right here. And then when water sits on the ground, right, I'm pretty sure that many of us have already watered plants before. I want you to imagine the process where water actually starts going into the ground. So your different soil particles, they actually have spaces between them, and water can actually enter these spaces. These spaces are known as pores. They can enter these spaces and they can go towards the ground. So let me just break down for you what soil is. So you guys have this slide in your handout, so make sure you fill up the blanks and also make the necessary highlights. Okay, so basically, ladies and gentlemen, we have soil, which is the loose topmost layer of the Earth's surface. It is made out of various materials of different sizes. So for those of you who have seen a pot of soil, for example, you will notice that the soil is not made up of a soil particle that is of a single size. Some particles are bigger, some particles are smaller. So what I want you to imagine is that water can actually fill up the spaces between the soil particles right here. So they can fill up the pores. That is how we describe this process. All right. So water that is trapped within the air spaces between the soil particles are actually called soil moisture. All right, so back to my diagram over here. When water enters the soil through rain or you watering your plants, what happens is that the water will start to enter the soil. So imagine it like this. All right, so imagine that gravity. Remember, gravity likes to pull things down, right? So water will then start to flow downwards into the soil as a result of gravity. So we see this word over here, more permeable, less permeable. I want you to think about it this way. Let's say you pour water on soil versus you pour water on a concrete floor, for example, your classroom floor. You will notice that the water will enter the soil much more easily as compared to the concrete floor that you have in your classrooms. So if it's able to enter the soil easily, it is called permeable. If it's not able to enter the material easily, it is called less permeable. So I'm just going to repeat this for you over here. So imagine that the water droplet or the water is on the soil surface. So since it is a more permeable material, it is able to flow into the soil more easily, and with the help of gravity, it flows downwards. So when your water enters the soil, it will eventually reach this less permeable material, be it rock, be it granite or other types of rock. The pores between that make up this rock is very, very small, so water will not be able to enter these rocks. So it stays in this area over here. All right, so you guys have this in your slide. Basically, groundwater is water that is found underground inside the pores and the cracks of the soil and the rock. So for you to imagine here, these are your soils and rock. There are spaces between the particles. which water can fill in. All right, so like what I mentioned just now, gravity helps to pull the water down and they enter the cracks and pores. However, when they reach less permeable rock, meaning rock which the pores are very small or there's no pores at all, it cannot go any further. All right, so make the necessary highlights as well as write down this over here. Less permeable equals to does not allow liquids to pass through because the pores or the cracks are really small or there's no cracks or pores at all, water cannot enter. All right, so you see our friend Walter here, he cannot go down any further as the rock below is less permeable. So he will stay within this zone. Water will accumulate in this area over here. And if I zoom in further into this image, you will notice that this area here is soaked with water. It's fully soaked with water. We call this the saturation zone. So this area here with the annotated by the black arrow, this is your saturation zone. It means that the pores and cracks are completely filled with water. On the other hand, if we take a look at this brown area here, it's not, there is water inside the pores and cracks, but it's not totally saturated or not totally full. We call this the unsaturated zone. It means that the pores can still hold water. All right, so there are two terms that you need to know here. Saturation zone is one, unsaturated zone is another one that you need to know. Saturation, completely filled with water. Unsaturated means that it can still hold water. All right, so next up on your slide, you notice that the upper limit of where groundwater has saturated the underground pores and cracks is called the water table. So I need you to write down the meaning of saturated here, and then we'll talk about the water table in much more depth. All right, so let's take a look at this diagram to help you understand. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we know that we have our unsaturated zone at the top here, and then there's a saturated zone which is completely soaked with water. So the area between the saturated and unsaturated zone, this area I have used the dashed yellow dash for, is known as the water table. So what I need you to take note of is the water table is not the saturated zone, but it is the upper part of your saturated zone. How do you remember this? Think of the water table as the tablecloth. So we're not talking about the entire area here, but we're only talking about this top area here. So the water table tells you what is the what is the line that is separating the saturated zone and the unsaturated zone. So let's say people, if my saturation zone increases further, it goes way up here, your water table can actually move up. All right, okay, so I hope you guys understand this part over here. Remember, you can rewind the video if you're unsure about anything that we're covering here. All right, so you guys have this in your notes. Basically what I am trying to explain to you here is shown in this diagram. So you see that since this part is saturated by water over here, my saturation zone, the upper part is known as my water table. Your unsaturated zone is demarcated over here. And like what we've mentioned at the start of this lesson, water can actually enter the soil and the process is known as infiltration. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, just to end off this part of the video here, I am sure that many of you annotated that the atmosphere holds water in its liquid form in clouds. So you are absolutely right. The atmosphere can function as a store of water, but for this topic, we are going to focus on the things that we have annotated here. So your glaciers, your rivers, your lakes, your groundwater, and your oceans. These are the stores that we are focusing on in this topic. So you are not wrong in saying that the atmosphere is a store, but we'll be focusing on the words in yellow for this topic. All right, so please complete the quiz questions that are in this form, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a good HBL, everyone.